Hello friends, welcome to our next video. We're continuing on in our bigger discussion on the theory of supply and demand. Last time we talked, we had taken the law of supply, the law of demand, and we had put them together to bring market equilibrium. In other words, we created a market. We brought buyers and sellers together, and we found that where those two curves meet is the equilibrium point. And from the equilibrium point, we can derive the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity in that market. In this video, we're going to extend that and we're going to talk about the concept of a change in demand. A change in demand, as you will learn, is a really critical part of market analysis, because when the demand curve changes, it shifts to a new curve. Now remember, supply and demand together formed equilibrium and therefore gave us market price. If a demand curve changes, then the equilibrium changes, and by extension, the price changes. So we're beginning this discussion of changes in demand and the associated shifts that come with it, but the bigger picture of this is when demand changes, market equilibrium, and therefore the price in the market changes. So as you go through this lecture and this video, as well as the next one on supply changes, you should start thinking about how the behavior of consumers, demand, how that, when it changes, will change markets and change prices. Put all that together into a broader, deeper way of looking at market dynamics and incentives and how behavior affects outcomes. Okay, let's jump in. So again, we're talking about changes in demand, which will lead to shifts in the demand curve. Now again, the big picture here, since equilibrium is found where supply and demand meet, anytime supply or demand changes, equilibrium changes. In this lecture, we're talking about demand. Let's recall from the beginning that demand is the consumer's willingness and ability to buy a product at every possible price, while quantity demanded refers to the amount that people want to buy at one specific price. So you'll recall that quantity demanded is one particular combination of P and QD corresponding to one point on the demand curve. Demand is the whole schedule or the whole curve. Demand is the function that brings all the possible points together. Now, to recap that, we have to distinguish between a change in quantity and a change in quantity demanded. And we're going to look at that through the lens of what causes it. The first potential thing that can happen is when there's a change in price. Now, when there's a change in price, this will lead to a change in quantity demanded, okay? A change in price will lead to a change in quantity demanded. A change in price will not change demand. That's going to be a midterm question. I'll tell you right now. Let's go back to our law of demand. As price goes up, QD goes down. Notice that as price goes up, quantity demanded goes down, not demand. They're related, they're similar, but they're different. Again, the law of demand tells us that if price changes, quantity demanded changes. So again, I don't like how this looked. Let me rewrite that. So again, when there is a price change, it will lead to a change in quantity demanded. And critically, this will lead to a movement along an existing demand curve, okay? There will be a movement along the existing demand curve. The demand curve doesn't change when price changes. The quantity demanded changes. That manifests right here. So we started off, let's go to a different color. We started off, let's say here at this point, which corresponded to a price of 30 and a quantity demanded of 3. We took the point, we go over, we go down. At $30, there's 3 pizzas demanded. When the price changes, let's say from $30 down to $20, that's going to lead to a change from this point to this point. And that's going to correspond to a change from this quantity demanded to this quantity demanded. You could think of it as a three-part step-by-step process. Step one, the price changes, which leads to step two, we go from one QD point to another. Notice critically that we're not getting a new demand curve. We're simply moving along an existing curve. And this movement from one point to the other corresponds to the third step in this, the change from one QD to another QD, okay? So that, my friends, is a change in quantity demanded. Now, when something other than a price change occurs, in other words, when we have a change in what we'll call a non-price factor, this is called a change in demand. Okay, so again, when price changes, quantity demanded changes. But when you have any other kind of change, what we're going to call a non-price factor change or a non-price change, this is a change in demand. And this is going to lead the original demand curve to die and be replaced by a new demand curve. This new demand curve, this is our shift. The original demand curve that was based on the original buyer behaviors, that dies, and the demand curve shifts to a new demand curve. The demand curve will shift to the right if demand increases, and it will shift to the left if demand decreases. So again, non-price factors lead to shifts in the demand curve. That shift will go to the right when demand increases. It will go to the left when demand decreases. And again, because the demand curve is now moving, we're going to have a new equilibrium. And associated with that, a new equilibrium price and quantity. This is how it would play out. Okay, so let's start off with the regular, we have P here, we have Q here, price and quantity. We have our supply curve and our demand curve, and they're going to meet right here at equilibrium. Circle your equilibrium point, go across to the left to get your equilibrium price, which we'll call P0. Go straight down, get your Q0. Nothing new here, an original market equilibrium model. Now let's say, for example, that demand increases. So the demand curve, this original one, and actually let's call this original demand curve D0. D0 is going to die, and it's going to be replaced by a new demand curve called D1. The demand curve will shift to the right. We're going to put a big fat arrow there so we can really graphically see that change. We're going to shift to the right. And when we have that new demand curve, this original equilibrium here is no longer in existence, and it's replaced by a new equilibrium. I'm going to put an N there. So we have O, the original equilibrium, and N, the new equilibrium. We have a new equilibrium, so we draw a line across and a line down, and now we see a new equilibrium that leads to a new, in this case, higher price, and a new, in this case, higher quantity. What this tells us, my friends, is that if anything happens to increase demand, we can predict that in that market, prices will rise and the equilibrium quantity of output will rise. Okay, that's an increase in demand. Now, we can also go the other way. Let's do that. Get rid of this, and let's go from an increase in demand to a decrease in demand. Again, we have supply. Actually, let's get rid of that. We have supply, our original demand curve D0. Supply and demand meet at original equilibrium. We go across, and that gives us P0. We go down, that gives us Q0, right? Let's say that in this case, demand were to fall. that would shift our demand curve to the left. And it would look something like this. We have a new demand curve. We're going to call that D1. We're going to draw a nice arrow to show that. And because we have a new demand curve, we have a new equilibrium. Again, I'll put an N so that we know that this is our new equilibrium. We drop a line straight down and get a new, sorry, that should be quantity 1. We get a new quantity and we drop a line straight across and we call that P1. And now we can predict that any time in a given competitive market, demand falls, we're going to predict that prices will fall and the equilibrium quantity will fall. So again, this is a change in demand. It will lead to a shift to a new demand curve, which will lead to a new equilibrium, which will give the market a new equilibrium output and a new equilibrium price, okay? So this, my friends, is a demand curve shift. To repeat, demand curve shifts are caused by non-price factors. Again, if the price of the item changes, we're simply moving up and down an existing demand curve. We only get a new demand curve when we have non-price factors. So we're going to say that demand will shift when we have non-price factors. And now the final question that we have to get our heads around is, what are these non-price factors? So let's identify 6 of them. Your job in this next exercise is to start thinking about how this would be seen in the real world and to start predicting how these events that we're going to outline could affect market dynamics, okay? Our first non-price factor would be a change in income. We've said that income, the money that you bring in, helps you buy things, and we've said that demand is defined as the ability and willingness to buy things. So income changes will affect your ability to buy. Income changes, therefore, will lead to shifts. Now, to understand this, we have to remember that there's 2 distinct types of goods in economic, and actually there's more than that, but for this purpose, there's 2 distinct categories or types of goods. We can call goods inferior, or we can call goods normal. I want to be very clear. The distinction between inferior goods and normal goods has nothing to do with product quality. Calling a good, again, this is where economic jargon is a bit different than outside world jargon. In the world of economic jargon and economic demand theory, inferior and normal are not about product quality. They are simply about how consumption of the good varies with income, okay? So let's start off with a normal good. For a normal good, if income goes up, then demand will go up. For normal goods, those are defined as goods where as your income rises, your consumption of the good rises. When income goes up, demand goes up, and that would shift your demand curve to the right. Or for a normal good, if income goes down, demand goes down, shifting your demand curve to the left. Again, income changes are non-price factors. They're extraneous to the actual market for the good itself, but they do affect your ability to buy, and therefore they shift curves. An inferior good is the same, but just the opposite. With an inferior good, by definition, if your income goes up, then your demand for the product goes down. Again, this is not saying that the products are crap. It's not impugning their quality. It's simply the relationship between your income level and your consumption level. That's all. For inferior goods, when your income goes up, your demand goes down. And when your income goes down, your demand for those goods goes up. Okay, so our first Non-price factor, our first demand curve shifter, would be changes in income. We have to determine if we're talking about a normal good or an inferior good, but once you know that, you can determine how a change in income will change demand, and then in turn shift demand, like we just showed. Okay, so that's our first one, a change in income. Let me clear some space here, and then we'll get to our next one. Our next non-price factor is going to be a change in the price of a substitute item. Now, some of you might be wondering, but Young, you just said a minute ago that we're talking about non-price factors, yet I threw you a price change. Subtle, but different, okay? When we're talking about a change in the price of a substitute item, we have to remember that we're not talking about the change in the item being analyzed. So whenever you do this kind of analysis, you have to always consider what is your item and what is your substitute. Let's say that we're talking about food and your item is hamburger, because who does not like a good burger? And the substitute is pizza, okay? Both items can bring you utility. They can both give you some much needed energy, although a pizza will probably lay you out for the night. They're both food and they're substitutes. We're gonna be analyzing the item of hamburger through the lens of pizza. So let's say, let's do some ifs. If the price of pizza goes up, notice that we're analyzing hamburgers and I am not touching the price of hamburgers. Instead, we're analyzing a change in the price of the substitute. So again, if the price of hamburgers is the same, does not change, but the price of pizza goes up, what's going to happen? Well, let's think about this from a logical consumer point of view. You're hungry. You can substitute pizza or hamburgers. You can prefer either one. If the price of pizza goes up, pizza is now relatively more expensive and therefore relatively less attractive. And because pizza is now relatively more expensive and less attractive, hamburger becomes relatively cheaper and relatively more attractive. So an increase in the price of pizza will pull you away from pizza toward hamburger, and our demand for hamburger will go up, shifting the demand curve for hamburger to the right. The opposite also holds true. If the price of pizza were to go down, this makes pizza look relatively more attractive. You want to consume more pizza. And if you're consuming more pizza, you'll consume less hamburger, even though the price of hamburger didn't change. Okay? If the price of pizza goes down, you favor pizza over hamburger, and therefore your demand for hamburger will fall, shifting the demand curve for hamburger to the left. So that's our second non-price shifter, a change in the price of a substitute. Remember, the item that we were analyzing had no price change. There was a price change to another good, and that's what caused you to change your behavior toward, in this case, the original item, hamburger, okay? Let's go to our third one. Let me clear some space here. Our second one, as you just saw, was a change in the price of a substitute item. Got that one done. The third potential demand curve shifter is a change in the price of a complement item. What's a complement? Well, whereas substitutes can be used in place of each other, I'm hungry, I want either pizza or hamburger, complements go together. So let's go back to our item. We'll say that our item is pizza. What would be a complement for pizza? What goes with pizza? Probably beer. And after this long, boring lecture, you might need 2 or 3. Okay? Again, pizza and beer complements, they go together. Let's say if the price of beer goes up. If the price of beer goes up, you will, we predict, drink less beer, right? Law of demand. P goes up, QD goes down. So if the price of beer goes up, you will probably consume less beer. Since beer and pizza go together, if you consume less beer, you will also likely demand less pizza, shifting your pizza demand curve to the left. Notice again, the price of pizza was not touched, but the price of a complement item was. When the price of beer went up, you want less beer. Since beer and pizza go together, you want less pizza. Your pizza demand falls, shifting the pizza demand curve to the left. On the other hand, if for some reason the price of beer falls, right, great success for you. If the price of beer falls, you will likely drink more beer. And if you drink more beer and pizza and beer go together, when you drink more beer, you will also eat more pizza. And this will take your demand for pizza and increase it, shifting the pizza demand curve to the right. Again, critical point. The price of pizza, remember, pizza is the item that we're analyzing. Beer's just, the price of pizza never changed in these examples. Other items, either subs or comps, changed in price, but those had predictable effects on the market for pizza. Okay, so that's 3. What else can change it? How about this? A change simply in buyer preferences. We'll say a change in buyers' tastes and preferences. Simply put, if for some reason, we're still talking about pizza as our item, if for some reason buyer preferences change either toward pizza or away from pizza, people will buy more or less pizza. Suppose that a study comes out that says that eating pizza will make you much more attracted to the opposite sex. Well, if that's the case, you're gonna probably want to have some more pizza. Let's say that a study comes out that says that pizza cures COVID. You can bet that people would flock to Domino's, and even though the price of pizza didn't change, taste and preference would have moved people to consume more, increasing demand, shifting the curve to the right, okay? On the other hand, let's say that a study comes out that says, let's say that the Atkins diet or the keto diet or the paleo diets become more popular because people are going to favor protein and stay away from carbs. In fact, when the keto and the paleo diets became more popular, people said, oh, I don't want any carbs, those are bad for me. The demand for pizza fell drastically, and it was based on changes in taste and preference, okay? So that's our 4th. Our 5th non-price shifter will be a change in buyer expectations. Simply put, and this is one of those weird ones where we bring in the role of psychology into economics. There's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy sometimes in economic theory, because if buyers expect prices to change, not right now, but sometime in the future, they will oftentimes act in ways that make those changes occur. So if, for example, you expect a price, let's say that we're talking about gasoline, you need to put some gas in your car. If you expect the price of gas to go up next week, would you rather fill up today at the low price or wait till next week at the high price? Well, if you expect the price of gas to go up sometime in the future, you will react predictably by filling up your tank today, which will increase demand. And on the flip side, if you suspect that the price of gas will fall next week, if you expect the price to go down in the future, you'll hold off on filling up your tank until later. And the demand today will fall, shifting the curve to the right. Okay. Notice something interesting here. If you expect the prices of gas or homes or stocks or any other product, Bitcoin, you see a lot of speculation there. If you expect the price of an item to go up in the future and therefore you consume more today, remember that increasing demand will actually raise the price of the item, which reinforces the original expectation, and you sometimes get these speculative loops or these bubble loops that emerge because of this. Okay, so that's one of those areas where psychology comes into economics, and it's pretty fun when you kind of try to unearth what human motivations are and how they can kind of lead to twisted economic outcomes. Okay, so we have the idea of a change in buyer expectations for price. Notice we can also have changes in expectations of future income. If you expect your income to go up sometime in the future, you know, you're about to graduate, you have a great job offer, or you have already a job and you're going to get a promotion. If you expect your income to go up in the future, you will buy more now based on that future expectation. Okay, so changes in buyer expectations can also affect market demand and shift it. And the final one is pretty easy, simply the number of buyers in the market. This one can be tied to things like, you know, maybe immigration. It can be tied to demographics. There's a lot of different things that can influence this, but we predict that anytime population goes up and the number of buyers goes up, demand will go up, okay? And that's our sixth one. So to repeat and wrap this up, we know that demand curves shift when non-price factors occur. When the price of a good changes, the curve does not shift. We simply move along the existing curve in what we call a change in quantity demanded. But we have a shift in the demand curve. We have a change in demand when the 6 non-price factors kick in. And those are, to repeat, changes in income, a change in the price of a sub, a change in the price of a comp, a change in taste or preferences, future expectation changes, or changes in the number of buyers. It's your job to memorize and understand these 6 non-price factors, these 6 demand shifters. Because in the future, I'm going to give you lots of different events and scenarios, and your job is to interpret how those events will affect the market. And it all comes down to demand curve shifts based on these 6 non-price factors. In our next video, we'll jump again from the demand side to the supply side and see what shifts supply. So stick around and we'll do that one next. Thanks.